Welcome back to the Contemporary Crusader. Today we're going to be talking about the AR-180. So the AR-180, it's Armalite's AR-180. It is the semi-automatic version of the AR-18. This was also a design by Eugene Stoner of AR-15 fame. This was designed specifically to be an alternative to the AR-15, but was never picked up by the US government or any foreign governments from my understanding. There were three manufacturers. There was Armalite US, and then there was Howa Japan, which is what this one is. Same Howa that makes the 700 clones today, I believe. And then there was Sterling, which was a British company. So kind of the order of desirability, I guess you could say. Armalite being the most expensive ones and the most desirable. Howa being the second, and then Sterling, from my understanding, is kind of the least desirable of the three. However, it's still a desirable. I don't think that the Sterling's quality, from what I understand, is quite as good as the Howa or the Armalite US. But they were all made under the Armalite licensing, and as you saw, it is marked Armalite. But I had a chance to get this a few years ago, and I jumped on it. I always thought they were neat guns. When I see them, I immediately think of IRA fighting in Northern Ireland. Now I don't know which ones they had. If they had the Sterling, common sense would say that they were getting the ones that were the English-made AR-180s, but maybe they were importing the Howas or smuggling the Howas or the Armalites. I don't know that, but what I think is cool is it's kind of a predecessor to a lot of the newer designs that you're seeing now, specifically the MCX, and I just did a video on the MCX, so go check that out if you're interested. And I spoke a little bit how the operating system is similar to the AR-180, and it's not exact. It's not like you couldn't, there's no parts interchangeability or anything like that. It's just it's almost like the MCX is an homage to the AR-180. This has kind of gained more popularity recently, specifically because Brownells is making their BRN-180, which is I haven't personally taken a BRN-180 apart or really have any time on one, but from my understanding, it's almost identical in design, except that's aluminum receiver instead of the stamped steel like this is. And there's changes with the rail system. It's a rail instead of a handguard, but overall the operating system, from my understanding, is effectively identical to the AR-180. But it's a cool piece of firearms history. It's kind of an iconic looking gun, and it has a lot of forward thinking aspects of it. A lot of things that you're seeing, like I said, in modern guns started with that, and that's kind of to show you that nothing's really new under the sun. It's just kind of taking old designs and modernizing them. But when I see an AR-180 or an AR-18, whatever, to me it's like the American AK, and I don't mean that the design's not the same, it's not nearly as prolific as an AK by any means, but it's the production, the actual production of it, to me reminds me of of an AK. And what I mean by that is it's got a lot of, like, almost every part is stamped steel. Every non-moving part, and even some of the moving parts, is a stamped steel instead of machined aluminum or machined steel, which is really interesting. You don't see a lot of guns where even the triggers themselves are a stamped steel, or the selectors. This one has, if you look, even it's ambidextrous, which is actually interesting for an older gun. So the selector is ambidextrous. It's a complete 180 throw. I don't know if the AR-18s were like an M16 where it was semi and then full, but this one is a complete 180 throw from going from safe to fire. But you can see that even the selector there is like a stamped steel. Now it's not on the other side, it's like a cast, but so many of the parts, I was going through it today and I was just looking at it trying to kind of think about what I wanted to talk about the gun, and so many of the parts are stamped steel. It's pretty cool. So the upper and lower are stamped. The like I said, the trigger group is stamped, even the hammer, and I'll pop that out and I'll show you at some point. This part is welded to the stamped receiver, which it's just neat. It just looks like I don't even know really. It's pretty unique in a lot of ways. But it's for an American-made gun. Usually with American-made guns, you're not seeing a whole bunch of stamped parts. It's usually machined. Nowadays, it's a lot of machined aluminum, but a lot of the parts typically in modern guns are machined aluminum or machined steel. Now the bolt carrier group is machined steel, and I'll pop that out and kind of go over that. But the takedown on this is also very interesting. So if you look, there's kind of this winged lever in the back, and it's got a detent on that side. So when you push that detent, you pinch it like that, and you push it into that rear sight, and then that takes it down from the upper and lower. Very similar to an AR where you have that front takedown pin and it pivots off of that. So that's very interesting. And then if you look on the recoil assembly, very similar to an MCX. So you have this back plate, and then you have two kind of guide rods, and then two recoil springs. So it is all housed in the upper receiver, so the stock folds. There's no buffer tube system like an AR-15, which is again interesting for the time. It just goes to show you that even then they were thinking about how do we modernize this, how do we make it more compact. And a lot of guns do have folding stocks, a lot of older firearms. So the AR is kind of unique where it has that buffer system. You look at an FAL, for example, that has the capability of having a folding stock. So it's not unique to this by any means, but it is interesting. A lot of the parts seem to be somewhat forward thinking. But it is very, very interesting, like I've said before, how much stamped parts on here. If you look here, and I don't know if you can see that, but you see that the hammer is even stamped steel, and you know, it's just kind of a strange design. I mean, even like that spring you can see maybe right there. That's actually the, I believe it's just a spring to give tension to the selector. So it's almost, I don't know if they were just trying to simplify things for production cost. I really don't know the mindset there. But it is interesting how different it is from an AR-15, even though it was designed by some of the same people. I don't know if they saw, you know, there was things that they saw about the M16 or field test or whatever, things that people didn't like, so they were trying to adjust from there. The designs really aren't that far apart, so I don't know how much feedback they had on the AR-15. So it could have been where they just made the AR-15 and they made this as an alternative and kind of, you know, pick your poison there. But I would imagine that production cost was somewhat less expensive with this just because of all those stamped parts instead of aircraft grade aluminum that had to be forged and machined. So we'll kind of take it apart a little bit. That just comes out right there. It's not going to focus, but That was that recoil assembly that I showed you. And then there is a dust cover similar to an AR-15 that is also a stamped steel. And then there's a reciprocating charging handle. So if you have any experience with the AR-180, I'm sorry, the BRN-180, or you've played with these, you'll know, but this is a reciprocating charging handle. So that's attached to the bolt. And then once you get it back here, it just pops out. Put that off to the side. And then the bolt carrier group. So this is really cool to me because you see a lot of designs that have a very similar bolt carrier group. If you look at the bolt itself, it's almost identical to an AR-15 bolt. The bolt, I mean, it might be identical. Now the back of it's completely different. Doesn't have the same tail. The cam pin is in a different location, but very similar there. So that's really interesting. But it makes sense. I mean, same guy designed it. So, but this is one of the wackiest parts of the whole thing. So you take out that recoil assembly, and then those rods actually hold the handguard in place. So once those are removed, handguard just pops up, and then it shows, and you can see that piston there. So the piston is different than the MCX piston, in that the MCX piston is just a rod inside of the gas block, and it's not spring loaded or anything. It's just a rod that stays in the gas block, and then it just pings the I don't even know what you call it, but it's almost like an op rod on top of the bolt that's independent of it, and it just pings that and then cycles it. But this one is more akin to like a 416 piston system, very similar to a 416 piston system, or maybe even like an LWRC, or some of the other systems out there. But the whole rod actually goes back and activates during firing, and then it's spring loaded and it goes back into place onto the gas block. You'll see that the front sight post has taper pins, similar to the earlier AR-15s. And then it looks like a bayonet lug. It has a little bit different profile, so I don't know if this one actually works as a bayonet lug, or if maybe the civilian versions didn't have it. I don't know, but it looks like a bayonet lug, but it also has a slightly different profile, so I'm not sure. I haven't tried it. And then you go to the muzzle device, and very, very similar to the early three-prong flash hiders. This is a little bit different. I don't think they're compatible. Has that lock nut in the back, which is a little bit different. But yeah, it's cool. It's just a little three-prong like the early XM16E1s. If you see, that bottom prong is actually wider than the top two, so it diverts that gas sideways, which is neat because you're not going to get that downward gas if you're in the prone position. So in my experience, three-prong, four-prong flash hiders are very good at suppressing flash, arguably better than most other flash hiders. I don't know why they went from this to the birdcage. I've heard stories people were using it to pry stuff, or they were getting bent. I don't know if any of that's true, but there was a transition in the XM16E1 to the M16A1 where they went from a three-prong to a birdcage. So I'm not sure what the real reason was, but the fact of the matter is that these types of flash hiders are extremely effective. So like I already mentioned, it does have a reciprocating charging handle, so that goes back during firing each time. I believe that they angled it up, so when you're right-handed and you're shooting, you can just come over the top and activate that. It's a little bit easier than going under. So I'm assuming that's why they designed it that way, but I don't know that for sure. The mag release is also stamped steel, but it is it's very similar to the release of an AR-15, which is appreciated. It's a very ergonomic placement of a mag release. The selector, like I also mentioned, is ambidextrous. The main difference being that it's a 180-degree throw from fire to safe. And like I said, I don't know if the AR-18s were 90 then 90 for full auto, but I would imagine that's what it is, because I don't know if you did 180, it would be upside down, which wouldn't really work. So I'm assuming they just, when they went from made the semi-automatic version, they just cut out the middle fire and went to a 180-degree throw. So when you're shooting it, it's not as quick as just like an AR-15 where it's just 90 degrees. So you have to move that all the way over. The trigger is bad. I mean, it's like, you know, it's like a crappy mil-spec trigger. It's not the worst trigger for like a stamped steel trigger, but it's not good. There's no take up or anything like that. Just hit that wall immediately. One thing I've noticed with this, there's an issue with my trigger specifically, and I have to take it apart. Every now and then I'll get like a hammer follow. It's almost like an inadvertent bump fire, but I think it's actually on release. It's almost like a binary trigger. When you're releasing the trigger, sometimes it will drop the hammer. So there's something going on there. I just got to take it apart and kind of identify what's going on. The pistol grip is interesting. It's nothing special to it, but it is different than the AR-15. It has a different angle. There's no texture on it, so it's kind of cool. It's marked AR-18 Armalite, which I think is dope. It has the dust cover, like I mentioned. That's a stamped steel, so just flip it up like that, just like an AR. My hand was in the way there, and then knocks out of the way when firing. The front takedown pin is not retained, so it has a detent on it, but it is not retained. So you just got to be careful that you don't lose that. The magazines are interesting. So they look very similar to AR mags, and I don't actually have any original factory mags. I need to track some down. So you can take an AR mag and modify it, but the part that actually latches into the mag like that on an AR, I think this is just a modified AR mag. And we'll get this focused. There we go. So that's where a typical AR would attach on AR-15. So the AR-18 actually has this very thin slot on this side. So you can take AR mags and modify them, which I believe this is what this one is. They don't work great. We'll see how they run today. I gotta track down some decent factory mags. And then on the back, it's a little bit different profile for the bolt catch on the back, so you have to reprofile that a little bit. But when you look at it, very similar to just a standard USGI AR-15, M16, M4 mag. When I bought the gun, it came with a bunch of mags, none of which were factory mags. They were all like modified. There is one mag that I have, and I can't remember the name. It doesn't work real well, but it's pretty interesting. It's actually made to work with AR-15s, AR-18s, and Mini 14s, which I have tested it, and it does cycle all three of those, but it's not super reliable, and it's kind of a chintzy plastic, but it is kind of a neat concept. The stock does fold, like I mentioned, so you just have these two little detents on the top and bottom. You pinch them, and then you fold it, and then it just clips on to, let's see if I can get that. There's a hook right there. Camera is not working with me here. So there's like a little nipple right here, and then a part on the stock, and then there's just a tensioner in there that holds it in place. So it actually stays in place, and then when you want to open it back up, you strip it, and it comes back up. The sights are peep sights, very similar to an AR. The rear sight, the front sight's almost identical. The rear sight is actually a little different. You see it has like a 200, and then you flip it, and then 400. Might not be able to, yeah, 400. And then it has the knobs on the side to dial and 0 for windage. I don't think there's an elevation. I think the only elevation change you have is for the 200 to 400, and then otherwise you have to use that front sight to work on the elevation, just like an AR, typical M4, especially like the M4A1s. I'm sorry, the M16A1s did not have an elevation knob, it just had the windage. Alrighty, so we got a steel set up at about 110 yards. We'll see how we do. IPSC style steel. And there was the little bump fire thing I was talking about, that pop pop. Actually, the hammer is releasing as I'm letting off on the trigger. The hammer's releasing, so it's almost like a inverted binary trigger. So that happens every now and then. I got to kind of take it apart and figure out the issue. There it is again. So yeah, you saw it, did it a few times. I don't know what the issue is. It's probably the engagement from the trigger to the hammer. So I got to look into that. I think what's happening is the disconnector is hooking onto the hammer, but then as I'm releasing the trigger, it's freeing itself from the disconnector, and then that engagement on the trigger to hammer is not good or something, and it's slipping. So it's almost like I said, it's almost like a binary trigger, but it's unintentional, so I definitely got to figure that out. Alright, so I decided to take it apart after having that issue repeatedly with the effectively firing on release of the trigger. Taking it apart, I just wanted to take this chance to kind of show the how everything's made. We can get that to focus here. See how it's all like stamped metal, so it's not machined. Here's the trigger, that was the hammer, here's the trigger, and that's also stamped steel, as you can see there. So I find that really interesting. A lot of the parts here, a lot of welds, a lot of stamped steel right in there. This spring here is actually what gives pressure to the selector there. So instead of being a detent and a spring going up the pistol grip channel, it's actually in the back there. So that's kind of neat. This is the bolt catch right here. If we can get that to focus. So that's actually what pops up to catch the bolt, but it's not, it doesn't have a release. And then that channel is just welded in there, and then a C-clamp holding it in place. This part of the selector is stamped, and then it has a C-clamp holding that in place as well. So a lot of stamped parts on this, which I find kind of neat. It's not really my preference in a modern, you know, a modern fighting rifle or anything like that, but it is kind of a neat part of history. So I'm going to keep looking at this. It seems that what's happening is there's some kind of contact issue here where the hammer catches on the trigger there. So I don't see anything obvious. I mean, it looks like just normal wear. Maybe it's, I don't really have another one to compare it to, so maybe it is, there's excessive wear. Maybe somebody did like a crappy trigger job on here at one point, and it's just, you know, starting to have issues. But basically what it seems like it's happening is the disconnector there, you can see it hooks on the inside of the hammer. When that releases, so when you let off on the trigger, it actually just goes forward. So it's not like a hammer follow or, you know, unregulated full auto fire. It's effectively like a unregulated binary trigger where it's firing on release of the trigger. So I'm going to keep looking at it. and then we'll shoot it a little more if I can identify the issue. All right, I'm back. So I think I figured out the issue. I kind of took it apart without really looking. It's the first time I've ever taken the trigger apart on this, so I didn't really look at what was going on. But I think what was happening, so this is the trigger spring here, and this is what gives tension to drive the trigger down. So this hole right here, this spring goes in there, and then it locks into place, and then this part of the spring has downward pressure on the receiver itself. So before, what I believe was, instead of being in this hole, this spring was on top of that trigger right there, that ledge. So I don't know if it slipped through or someone put it together improperly at some point. But I think that's the issue. So we're going to put it back together and we will see what happens. All right, so I took it all apart as you saw. I identified what I think is the issue. Seems to be running fine now. So let's try this 100, it's like 120 or so IPSC steel. Stovepipe. So I don't know if that's a magazine issue, but got one in the chamber. So as you're seeing, this isn't necessarily like a go-to gun, but it is neat part of history, so we'll see. All right, we'll try some reloads just to show the manual of arms with this. I'm left-handed, like I've said multiple times before, so it's a little bit different than if you're right-handed. But one thing I've noticed with this, so specifically with the selector, is that it's easier for me to keep my thumb on this side and activate it that way. And typically that's how I work a selector if I'm using a AR that doesn't have a ambidextrous selector on it. And then additionally, this is a 180-degree throw like I mentioned before, so it's just it takes a little bit of time to train your mind to go all the way around. It's almost like if you've shot a select fire AR or M4, M16, whatever, it's like going to full auto or 3-shot burst, anything like that. So got to get that 180-degree throw with this short stubby ambi selector on this side. It's not real efficient to try to use my thumb to activate it. So I just keep my thumb over here, get it all the way around. It's a lot easier to activate. Again, I mentioned the bolt hold open. It has one, but there's no bolt release. So you have to charge the charging handle to release the bolt. So I've played with this. I've shot this more making this video than I have ever since I've owned it. So I've just kind of been playing with different things. One thing that I kind of noticed, because this mag's a little tight, maybe not all of them are tight, again, not factory mags, so who knows, but it's easier to push, rip out that magazine, go for the new one, and then get back on target. So we'll try that. We'll see what we can do with that. So got about a target like 5 to 7 yards. Just a little bullseye, and we'll see what happens. So 1 R2. So I went for that magazine first before dropping it, so that's just a training error on my fault, or my part. But then when I inserted the new mag, it over inserted. It's a real narrow, if you look, and I did show this before, but just to reiterate it, it's a real narrow slot. So it's just a real thin mag catch, and so it's easy to push past it when the bolt's open. So I'm going to try that without so much force, and we'll see what we can do that time. Okay, it didn't pick up that time. I think it's too sensitive, so all right, so let's try that again. and 526. All right, as always, thanks for joining. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Had the one issue with the trigger, got that cleared up pretty easily. It's just spring placement was a little off, so that was fixed, and after that didn't have any issues. Had a couple stovepipes, but that was mag issues. Like I said, I don't really have any good mags for it, so definitely got to add that to the list to get some good mags for it. But very interesting piece of firearms history. I really enjoyed making this video because it's the most that I've ever shot, the AR-180. So it's actually real pleasant to shoot. It's a fun gun. Now that I got that trigger issue cleared up, we just got to get the mags and it should be rocking and rolling. So hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, hit me up. If you're liking what you see, comment, like, share, all that good stuff. And until next time, be safe.